This is a key to worksheet 13.6 part B, and again we're dealing with quadratic equations, and you want to solve this by factoring. So you cannot use the quadratic formula, you have to do this by factoring. So remember, a quadratic equation has this form: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and whenever you have all the terms on one side and zeros on the other side, that's in standard form. And we also have it in descending order, so standard form. And one of the other things you're going to use is the zero factor property. So that's another thing you're going to use with factoring, the zero factor property. And basically, the zero factor property says if you have two or more factors whose product is 0, so you have a times b is 0, then one of these factors must be 0. So either a is 0 or b is 0. Okay, so you use that idea in part A, you're going to use it again in part B. Now, in number 1, you want to solve this quadratic equation. It's already in standard form. All right. Now, the other thing I noticed to make things a lot easier for me is that the GCF here is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and factor out a 3. And when I do that, I'm going to get 3 times, in parentheses, x squared minus x minus 20 equals 0. So now that makes things a lot easier to factor. So this looks, if I cover up the 3 here, this is a lot easier to deal with. So then I get 3 times, now let's go ahead and factor this trinomial. And when I factor that trinomial, I get, let's see, xx, 5 and 4. The last sign's negative, and I want the middle term to be negative. So that means this has to be negative, this has to be positive. And before I go on, let's check it. The outer, forget about the 3 for right now. The outer is 4x, the inner is a negative 5x. I'm going to add them up, I get negative x. Okay? All right, now, notice that there are 3 factors here. 3 is a factor, x minus 5 is a factor, x plus 4 is a factor. Okay? And according to the zero factor property, when I have 2 or more factors whose product is 0, then one of them has to be 0. Well, this can never be 0 because that's 3, right? All right, so that has no variable attached to it. So I'm just going to cover it up for right now. But x minus 5, that factor has a variable in it, and that factor has a variable in it. So in order to get a product of 0, one of these factors with the variables has to be 0. So you set each of those equal to 0. That's a zero factor property. And so notice I went from a quadratic equation to 2 linear. So I didn't use this at all. All right, because that factor has no variable attached to it. So that's never going to be 0. That's always 3. So then I add 5 to both sides, and so I get x to be 5. That's one of your solutions. And then here, x is going to be negative 4. So your solutions are 5 and negative 4. And again, if you want to check, I'm not going to check all of these. I'm just going to check, let's say, negative 4. Let's check negative 4. Remember, that's not necessary. So not necessary. Necessary. And I think I'm misspelling necessary. Necessary. All right, so let's check x equal negative 4. Okay, so we go back to the original. Where we see the variable, you substitute negative 4. So you're going to say 3 times negative 4 in parentheses squared minus 3 times negative 4 in parentheses minus 60. And you want to see that's going to equal 0. Use your calculator. Use your calculator. So 3 times, in parentheses, negative 4. I'm squaring that. Minus, subtract 3 times negative 4. Make sure it's negative now. Negative 4. And then minus 60. And then press equal. Notice you get 0. That's what you wanted. Okay. All right, over here, now if I factor this, so the GCF is 1. It's in standard form. So I get x, 3, 3. The last sign's positive, so these signs have to be the same. It's going to be the middle sign, so both negative. What you notice here, though, is that these two factors are the same. All right? So when I use the zero factor property, I'm just going to use one of those. X minus 3 equals 0, so x equals 3. So there's only one distinct solution, x equals 3. It just occurs twice. But you only list it once. So this is called a double root. You don't have to know that for this, but that's called a double root. And when you graph, if you were to graph this next semester, you will notice that this does mean something in terms of the vertex of this graph. All right, but you only list it once. So if you have it listed twice like this, just list it once. All right. Okay, over here, Now remember, you want to use factoring, so make sure you use factoring. So this is the difference of two squares. So I'm going to go ahead and factor this. The GCF is 1. So 2x, 2x, 7, 7, plus minus. Remember that? All right. And then so you set each one equal to 0 because that product is 0, so that means one of them has to be 0. So 2x plus 7 equals 0. 2x minus 7 equals 0. And I solve each linear equation. So I subtract 7 from both sides. I get 2x equal negative 7. Divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 times x is x. So one of my solutions is negative 7 halves. The other solution, add 7 to both sides. Combine like terms. I get 2x equal positive 7. Divide by 2. I get x to be 7 halves. All right? Okay. That was number 3. Number 4. Okay, number 4 knows that this is not standard form, so we got to put it in standard form. So let's go ahead and bring this term to the other side. So I'm going to get 7x squared plus 49x equals 0. All right, now remember, you always must look for a GCF. GCF here is 7x. That's your GCF, 7x. So let's factor out the 7x. When I factor out 7x, 7x times x is 7x squared. And then 7x times 7 is 49x. All right, so step 1 is to put in standard form. Step 2 is to factor. You do have a GCF, and that's what we get. So now I'm going to use a zero factor property. I have two factors whose product is 0. So I'm going to set each one equal to 0, just like this. Now to get x by itself, I mean, you could look at this and say 7 times 0 is 0, right? So x has to be 0. But really what you're doing is dividing both sides by 7. And then 1 times x is x, and then 0 divided by 7 is 0. So there's one of your solutions. Over here, subtract 7 from both sides. I get x to be negative 7, so there's the other solution. Okay? All right, if you want to check this, let's check negative 7. Let's check negative 7. Again, it's not necessary. So I get 7 times negative 7 squared, and I want to see if that's going to equal negative 49 times a negative 7, right? All right, so let's check the left side. Let's see if those two sides are equal to each other. 7 times negative 7 squared, right? Just like this, equal, that's 343, right? Let's check this one. Negative 49 times negative 7, just like that, equal 343. All right, so see how you can check real easily using your calculator? But again, you must always go back to the original because you could have made a mistake anywhere along the process. Okay, over here, is this in standard form? Yes, it is. What's the GCF? 1. So let's go directly to factoring. All right, so 5x, x. Now let's think about 12, and I want 17x. All right, so let's see if 4 and 3 is going to work. If I put 4 here and 3 here, yep, that will work. Okay, 4 and 3. All right, and notice the last sign is negative, so these signs are different. I want the middle sign, the middle term to be positive. In order for that to happen, the 4 has to be positive, 3 has to be negative, and check. Notice that 5x times 4 is 20x. Negative 3 times x is a negative 3x. 20x and a negative 3x is 17x. All right, now I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. That's a zero factor property. So I get 5x minus 3 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. And then you solve each of these linear equations. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So 5x equals 3. So x is 3/5, right? Over here, subtract 4 from both sides. I get x to be negative 4. So those are your two solutions. So x equals 3/5, x equals negative 4. All right, and then finally, this right here, it kind of looks like this, doesn't it? All right, where you have two factors that are the same, so you just use one of them. Because this, if you think about it, isn't that really 3x minus 5 times itself? All right, so those two factors are identical, so you just got to look at one factor. So 3x minus 5 equals 0, and then add 5 to both sides. So 3x equals 5, divide both sides by 3, and the 3 divided by 3 is 1. 1 times x is x, so x is 5/3. So there's your solution. Remember, only listen once. Okay? All right, so that's going to take care of 13.6 Part B.